everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the test anxiety workshop for COSI. I know some of you guys might not be in the COSI and maybe were referred by your academic success coach, so I'm happy that you guys are here. And if you would like to know more about the scholarship program, I'm always available to talk about that. As always, we have our lovely guest speaker, Elizabeth Saunders. And Elizabeth, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Saunders. I'm one of the therapists at the Campus Counseling Center. We are in the nope, there's more letters. Well, that's okay. It's the building where the nursing program is. We're on the first floor, right next door to the health clinic. And I'm going on this, once we reach May, it will be the end of my 4th year here. So I think we have an awesome campus counseling center. I got my bachelor's degree on college campuses, went to various schools in Colorado, but about 20 years ago. And when I just think about the lack of services from when I went to school, it makes my heart so happy what we're able to offer on this campus and specifically through our student counseling center. So let's see, I'm going to click through my presentation. I always love any extra participation. So if you think of anything while I'm talking, please feel free to type it into the chat. And then I'll maybe take a break halfway through or make sure I resolve anything at the end that are maybe more specific questions. Or, feel free to just speak up. I have my little row of faces, but sometimes I'm not sure or names, and I'm not sure if I will see a hand raise or something. So hopefully this can be easily accessible to everyone. And today we're going to talk a little bit about test anxiety. Here we go. So a few things, we want to create a definition of what test anxiety is or make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Being in the field of mental health, I like to figure out the why. So why do I experience these symptoms? And so talking a little bit about common fears and then the negativity bias of our brain and why it's so powerful. And then just some practical tips for before an exam, during an exam, and potentially after, and then some extra resources. So again, this might be a quickie, but we'll see how we do. So what is test anxiety? It is the combination of our physical symptoms, but also our emotional and mental health kind of reaction that interferes with our ability to perform well. This might be in a presentation or a test. So common. If it just helps you all feel like you are not alone, the amount of folks we see here at the counseling center struggling with test anxiety is so many of y'all's peers. So you're definitely not alone. It's a very common experience, but just because it's common doesn't mean we have to suffer through. And if there's anything we can do to help improve how people feel about it, we certainly want to. Okay. So again, from my perspective of dealing in mental health, so much test anxiety starts with a negative thought spiral. When I think about how our brain has negative thoughts, I try to think of it through a strengths lens. So anytime we see something that our brain determines as a threat, this system that's supposed to respond to threats in our body is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So just a real basic review of our fight, flight, or freeze response. That's what's happening when we're confronted with something that's being required of us in a high stress situation in school. Our body might perceive it as a threat. It sets off the body's alarm system, which releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol into our body. And it's preparing the muscles and our heart and lungs to either fight off something, to run away from something, or to freeze us. None of which are super helpful when you're taking a test. So I do find it's helpful to remind yourself like, oh, my body's doing exactly what it's supposed to do in response to a threat. It just is doing it out of proportion to what the threat is, and not giving us the tools we need. One metaphor I sometimes use, which I don't think I've shared with y'all if you've done these with me in the past, is it's like if you have a home and your home has an alarm system in it, you want that alarm system to go off when it's triggered. If someone's robbing your house, if there's a fire somewhere in the house, if water is leaking, we want an alarm system in our house to pick up on that stuff. What's happening with things related to anxiety is it's almost like the alarm system is getting tripped when the dog comes through the dog door. So we don't want that to happen. So the negative thinking can then trigger sort of three categories of fear. We either have a fear of repeating a past failure, we have a fear of the unknown of what's going to actually happen that day, or we have a fear that spirals into complete worry about the future. So let's deal with them one at a time. So the first fear of repeating past failures. Let me just see. I don't know if this is okay. Of repeating past failures. What are the ways we want to counter it? So again, the brain's negativity bias is going to always amplify our failures from the past. It's going to remember the one last test we failed and forget about all 20 tests that we've taken in our life that got us to the point we're at today. So of course it's going to pull up the one test we failed. And here are some ways we want to counter it. There's some summary slides a little further on. So if some of this like doesn't feel quite like it connects, my hope is that we can tie it all together at the end. But one thing that's actually been proven in a study is that students who wrote down all their fears just before taking the exam outperformed students sometimes by a whole grade, like an A to a B or a C to a B. So this strategy of like just getting all those like fears that are roaming around in your brain, like the 10 minutes before you have your test or presentation, can be really helpful to just get them all down on a piece of paper. What it does to our brain too is our brain has a fear that it'll forget important things. So it'll just keep replaying the same thought over and over. So writing it down allows you to then tell your brain like, brain, we have this fear written down. We can follow up on it after this test. So it's in a safe place. But it clears out space in your brain for it to be able to recall the content that you need to for your exam. This other sort of mantra for the fear of repeating a past failure is remembering that you're not defined by either your past successes or failures, and that the number of past successes and failures we have are not necessarily predictive of outcomes. So each battle is a fresh battle to be fought. A healthy amount of fear is good. It's when it goes too far that we worry about it, but taking that healthy amount of anxiety of just the normal kind of jitters and not connecting it to a past success or failure and being open to this being a fresh outcome is important. And then in terms of really practical steps, again, it's really being like a data gatherer or a scientist when we're looking at previous exams. So I see so many people, and I know many of you are at a lot of like different places in this college experience. But you know, each professor is different. You'll have a friend who's taking chemistry with one professor, and you're taking the exact same theoretically chemistry class with a different professor, and completely different teaching styles, completely different wording maybe of exams. I don't know that for sure. Some departments may make the professors kind of use really similar exams, but kind of depending on the content that you're studying, there may even be completely different ways that they present questions for how they want to test your learning. And so I think it can be really easy to become emotionally attached to that information. And so trying to look like it at past tests, past homework, like a scientist, and really gathering data for like, oh, it's this style of question that I struggle with, or it looks like they commented that I didn't write enough in a paragraph for this answer. So it does require a little bit of being open and fighting the part to get emotionally attached that feels like the professor doesn't like us personally, that the questions are purposefully really hard and that they're trying to trick us. And to sort of, we call it in the mental health field, finding your wise mind. We have our emotional mind and our rational mind. And we don't want to spend too much, we don't want to move all the way into either of those. So the combination of balance between our emotional mind and our rational mind is our wise mind. So we're able to recognize that we're having a strong feeling about something, but we're also able to gather data in a neutral way to really analyze it. And then I think there's this step of like, we really do have to be honest with ourselves. Like, was I really as prepared as I could have been? Did I really spend as much time studying as I could have? Is there a chance my eyes were watching other people and I was trying to compete and rush to be done as fast as they were? So that is fear number one, just the fear of repeating a past failure and then the ways to counter it. So to move from past to present. So the second fear is the fear of the unknown in the present. So humans fear what we don't understand. So when our brain feels a little confused or confounded, it again releases those neurochemicals, cortisol, adrenaline, and that's a good thing because we need those in survival situations. But then the counter to this is we need to grow our understanding. Where I was going with this is the amount of students I meet, usually who are new to the college experience, so maybe not all of you, but people who don't realize that they can meet with the professor. They sort of see office hours as like an emergency last stop. I'm just a real big relationship person. And I think when professors have a story to put with a face, that really does resonate with a lot of professors. I know there's some who it won't, but I think those are the ones who, if they can reference that you've come to a couple of their office hours, that if you have to reschedule your test because a conflict comes up, or if you have to request an extension on a paper, or if you're not doing great on tests and you're looking for advice, I just think when you have that professional connection, they're more kind of likely to hear your story, want to connect with you, and want to help and support you as much as they can. So I do really encourage people, and that's part of the unknown too, right? If like we let our mind put our professor into this role in our mind that puts them like better than us, higher up than us, in total control of our futures, it makes that fear feel more realistic than if we meet with them and realize like, oh, they're just a human being, just like me, sitting behind a desk, stressed about the snow. It builds humility in the relationship between both of us. And then the classic tip of replicating the test environment. So, and I was like the biggest culprit of this. I would study for a test, like snuggled up in a blanket on my couch with my favorite TV show playing, tons of snacks around. But then like that's not the test environment at all. And so sometimes for our brain to not like, and again, I'm speaking in generalities. I don't know how it is around campus, but if your tests, maybe a lot of times with finals, they might schedule them in a different classroom, or the test taking might happen in like a computer lab. And I think if you can do some practice tests in that environment, it really helps then your body not have that additional like smelling a new smell or sensing a new sound when you come up on test day. Oh, this says fear number one, but it should say fear number three. We let the stakes get disproportionately high. So again, I'm a realist. It really does feel like sometimes one bad test score can lead to a total change in our future. So I'm not trying to say that that isn't a possibility, but in the moment right before a test, if we're letting our brain connect how we do on this one test to a fear of being homeless in 6 months, it's just going to it's just going to change how our brain is working for that next hour and make it so panicked about this hypothetical future that we're going to have a really hard time accessing the information we've learned. There is also science that says that memory recall, is seriously impaired when we have those fight or flight neurochemicals going in our body. So the ways to counter it is, yes, of course we want to take test taking seriously. Of course we want to take our academic future seriously, but we just can't let our brain go into that spiral of letting it define our entire future. We have to remind ourselves that people survive these types of failures all the time. And to remember that physiologically, our brain thinks it is a literal life or death situation, when in fact it isn't. So I do have this fun TikTok video that I just want to, okay, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna do that. While I'm paused to access my little 2-minute video clip. Let me go back to Zoom and see. Did anyone, I can't see my little icon. Does anyone want to type any questions, concerns, thoughts into the chat? I'm pulling this up. Or to just like unmute yourself and speak up if you feel like. Okay, I'm still sharing and I'm gonna let my friendly, well, let's see if I can share it with better audio. Let me do this and maybe it'll do share sound, optimize for video sharing, and then I'll share this. All right.
Suffer from test anxiety.
Oops, let me start over.
This is a video for people who suffer from test anxiety. I'm Dan Willingham. I'm a professor who studies human learning. I want to focus in particular on spiraling thoughts. That's where something small happens and your anxiety blows it up into something huge in your mind. So you're taking a test, there's a few questions in a row that you don't know the answer to, and from that you conclude, I'm probably going to fail this exam. And then you think, well, if I fail the exam, I'm probably going to end up failing the course. And if I fail the course, then I may have to leave school. And if I leave school, oh my gosh, my parents are going to be so upset. I'll probably never end up getting a good job, and so on. Now, there's a good way of dealing with spiraling thoughts, which is realistic self-talk. There are two things you want to focus on. One is the likelihood that what you're anticipating is actually going to happen. So when there are a few questions in a row that you don't know on an exam, do you usually end up failing the test, or do you usually worry about failing the test, but actually the grade ends up being okay? And then also think about the consequences. All right, suppose the worst does happen and you fail the course. Does that mean that your path in life is really set? There's no way to bounce back from this? Now, some people try realistic self-talk and it doesn't work for them because they do it at the wrong time. People tend to do this when they're feeling anxious. In other words, in the middle of the test. But realistic self-talk sort of require, if you try and do it during the test, you're anxious, right? So this is requiring that you set aside that anxiety and then start thinking logically right in the middle of the test. That's just not going to happen. So instead, what you want to do is do the realistic self-talk like 2 or 3 days in advance of the test. Then during the test, when you start to feel that anxiety rise, that's when you can say, no, I went through this. And I remember concluding that the thoughts I'm having right now, these aren't really very realistic. Okay, the difference is that even though you can't think in the midst of anxiety, you can remember in the midst of anxiety. Memory is just not as demanding of your mental processes. So in the middle of the test, during test anxiety, you're still going to be able to remember that conclusion that you drew. This isn't a comprehensive solution to test anxiety. This is specific to spiraling thoughts. But if you have that issue, give it a try. Let me know in the comments if it works for you.
I'll do this. Okay, so I just really liked how he kind of talked through that. I was going to see, no questions, great, Hannah. Do some subjects elicit more test anxiety than other subjects? Great question. So I would say it's so person specific. Gosh, I think as we're in the nursing building, I do see a lot of nurses on campus, but I think that's purely anecdotal. It does seem like a very high stress field. And I think just because of the high standards of the nursing program, a lot of those, folks we do see for test anxiety and that type of scenario. So a lot of folks in our nursing program are doing simulations. So they're doing reenactments of medical procedures. They're in a simulation lab. So I would say it's one of two things in the nursing field that I tend to see the most test anxiety from, which is, and I can click down on this, which is both that the brain has to work harder to separate the reenactment or the scenario from reality. So it can make you probably a little more anxious if you're in like a simulation lab or performing like a chemistry experiment as part of your, did I lose Zoom? No, I didn't. So I think those ones might be a little more challenging for your brain because you're not in a traditional testing environment. You're like doing a scenario. I would also say, what would I also say? Oh, it is that sometimes too in the programs that require you to leave the classroom you're used to and like do the test at a computer in a testing center might provoke a little more anxiety. Again, because it's an unfamiliar environment. I don't know how it works here on campus, but like when I've had to take professional like licensure tests at testing centers, there might be people like I might be doing a test on one subject on my computer that takes 3 hours. The person sitting next to me might be taking a totally different licensing test on a whole different subject and theirs takes 45 minutes. But if I don't know that and I see that person getting up after 45 minutes and I've still got 75% of my test left, then I think also that's going to trigger it. So I wanted to address that question in the chat of if some subjects maybe provoke more test anxiety than not. I would just say that's kind of anecdotal from my experience, and it's probably very personal. But it also just plays to our strengths too. If an exam plays to our strengths, we're going to feel less anxious. And I think I talk about this too. Oh no, that was a different video clip I ended up not including. It has to do like how passionate we are on the topic. So I think if I'm just needing to do well, this is a real life example. To become a therapist, you have to take statistics because we have to understand how scientific studies are done to make sure that the methods we're using in therapy are scientifically beneficial. So, but I don't feel passionate about statistics, not great at math, do not love those concepts. Whereas some of the courses I had that were specific to transitions in life, to trauma, those exams are easier for me because I'm more passionate about the material. So I hope that was a welcome response to whether some things trigger more or less test anxiety. Let me come back to screen share. Okay, so maybe I'll just go back. So original thoughts are, I have a fear of repeating past failure. I have a fear of the unknown and I have a fear of the stakes. We talked through all three of these and our new thoughts can be, I will definitely have a better study plan for this test. I can become comfortable with the unknown and not all unknowns are dangerous. And the third new thought is, well, I hope to pass this test. If I don't, it's just another learning opportunity rather than a definitive judgment about myself. This is a tricky thought game we can play with ourselves, which is, maybe this failure will lead to having to make a change of plans, but you've made it to that point so far. So if you failed a couple of tests, you're still surviving. And if you pass it, then it means we proved our brain wrong and it misunderstood a potential threat. Okay, so here's just a flow chart. As usual, I can email this presentation to Ryan so that she can disperse it to all of you. And if any of these slides are helpful to just kind of print out as a bulleted sheet, I hope that's what this can be. So before the exam, the new plan, I think the overall umbrella is like what I spend most of my time talking about in these presentations to you all, which is we have to start from a baseline of taking care of our overall health. We got to check in with at least some sort of an eating plan, pack some snacks, eat a good breakfast, give your brain some fuel. We have to at least have a baseline of some sort of restful sleep. I know it's not always realistic before exam time, but if we're at least starting with a little bit in the bank, incorporating some movement and making sure we're not losing all the joyful activities in our life when we're in school. It just helps our brain think it's more true that this school plan is a make or break it. It's not being balanced by all the other things we have going on in life. So we're going to start the process with enough time to do the steps we talked about effectively. We're going to get to know professors and classmates in the class so that we have an idea of what the actual exam is. So again, to reference like I'm a licensed clinical social worker. What you kind of learn as you're going through that process is that the type of questions that are on that test are multiple choice questions. They'll give you a scenario and then they'll give you 4 solutions. All 4 solutions are possible to the person's problem. So you have to either pick the best is what they'll say, or put them in order of how you would do them. If you don't realize that's the trick to the questions, then you will not do well on that test. But the way you learn how to figure out the trick to the questions, which is that, yes, all the answers are right. This is what the test is looking for. We learn that through speaking to other professionals in the field. We learn that from our faculty and professional mentors. We learn that more through the shared conversation rather than from a study book. So again, those relationships with professors and classmates can be so helpful. We're going to use the study techniques that are most effective for us by being scientists and looking at our past exams and figuring out like what the actual reason we didn't do well on it was. Practicing the tip of brain dumping our lingering fears 10 minutes before the test, and then maybe bringing a sticky note. So like that gentleman was saying, like your reminders. This can be the reminders not to catastrophize, but it can also be your motivational quotes, why you are likely to succeed, a reminder to do some breathing, and anything else that's going to keep you motivated when you start to maybe feel a little anxious or panicked during an exam. So these are ideas for your sticky note, or I put lock screen on there if you're able to have just like click your cell phone and have your little notes come up on your home screen. Again, our body, if it thinks it's in a fight or flight situation, is going to release certain neurochemicals. We can counter those by accessing a deeper breath or a longer exhale. We can calm our body by reminding it that our muscles don't have to be tense. We are not planning to run away from this threat. We're planning to sit in our chair and stay. So we can kind of discharge some of that tension in our muscles by doing some progressive muscle relaxation, standing and stretching. I always encourage the bathroom breaks. If your professor allows one, take a bathroom break, go to the bathroom. Not necessarily to use it, but to splash some water on your face, to get your blood flowing, to change the scenery, to get reconnected with your surroundings. We can sit in postures that make us feel more powerful, confident, and assertive. And then we can write down any coaching to calm our emotions and thoughts. Right after this. Oh, let me just do a quick pause. Do we have any other? I'm just going to give a moment if someone is having a burning thought or question at this stage of the game that you want to type into a chat. Or raise your hand, or not raise your hand, but fantastic. Okay. Sorry, I don't know if everyone can see all of this. No questions, love it. Okay. Let's keep going. So I always say this to people too, as a therapist. Sometimes the change we need is like a mental workaround. It's changing our emotional response to something. It's adding knowledge or meaning. So the action is happening in our mind. But sometimes the solution to a problem is actual practical things. So that's sort of what this is. I guess maybe I've mixed it a little bit, but the last one was more like the physiologic and emotional things. These are just like very basic test tips that y'all probably know from other places. But again, nice to have them in one spot. So again, making a conscious effort to listen to or read the instructions slowly and thoroughly, connect to those and be in the present moment instead of letting your brain race ahead to just like see what's on there. I really love this tip too. Before you read through a test, if it's a question specific test, is to actually spend the first few minutes just putting everything you've studied about the test either on the back of the paper if it's a paper test or on a scrap paper if you're allowed. That way, it's almost like, not a lot of people allow you to bring like sort of a information sheet in with you. Some professors do, but it just kind of gives you, before your kind of memory can be impaired by the anxiety of actually taking the test, you can kind of dump all the information is in your brain that you've been studying the last couple days onto the paper before you read the questions. That way you can do a switch of your focus to then reading the questions. And it feels so good when you're like, oh, that was part of what I studied. I wrote it down on this scrap sheet right before the test started. So do the brain dump first, then skim the entire test, then answer the questions first. Could be with info from your brain dump or your scrap paper, which is going to then build your confidence because you're doing the things first, and then going back to the questions that you skipped, checking the work to be sure it's complete. And I meant to put on here, just trying so hard not to compare yourself to others. That's a one I get a lot in the counseling office, is people saying like, I'm noticing my classmates like getting up and leaving earlier than me. I'm the last person in the classroom. We got to counter that with just remembering everyone's going at their own pace. We have no idea how they answered the content. We don't know how they're doing in other classes. Maybe like the person's question before, this class that they're in is their strength. It's not our strength of content, but they're flip-flopped. We're flip-flopped in another class that we would never know because we can't compare. And then I just kind of want to go to the next level too, because I am in mental health and I don't like to invalidate when there is a more intense medical or mental health diagnosis going on. So if there are other physical and medical concerns at play, those really can contribute to how we do in situations like this. If you struggle from chronic pain, of course, managing that pain while you have to sit for an extended test period is going to impact how you do. If you've been meaning to get to the disability services office to get an accommodation because something about either using the certain computer device or having to use a computer and not having access to it during a test would be important. Make sure those tasks don't keep getting put to the bottom of the list. If you have to take a medicine for something completely unrelated to school, but it's making you drowsy, figuring out what we can do. Don't let yourself minimize those things. They can really impact how we perform in tests, and rightfully so. Some symptoms do meet the severity threshold for a specific diagnosis associated with anxiety. If you're like watching this whole slideshow for me and you're like, I've literally tried all of that and mine is so beyond any of that, there may be an anxiety diagnosis going on, and it would certainly be worth following up with a mental health professional to just sort of see if you're at that threshold. And along with that, many general practice doctors and mental health prescribers have some medicine at their disposal that's non-drowsy, and they've really found can assist in performance-related anxiety treatment. And then, of course, holistic interventions that can be helpful. Sometimes people do have relationship with herbal or energetic or physical modalities. Massages, acupuncture, teas, supplements. Again, those aren't necessarily my specialty, but certainly can be beneficial. What is my specialty and what we do offer at the counseling center is the AccuWellness appointments. And we just get such consistent reports back that it can really help with anxiety, and specifically test anxiety. So we do offer the AccuWellness, which is 5 acupuncture needles in each ear. We're all licensed and trained to provide that treatment in the counseling center. We try to make it so that you don't have to plan too far in advance. But if for example, you have a test coming up in 2 weeks, if you were to call the counseling center and make an AccuWellness appointment for the day before, I think that would be incredible. Generally, people report they sleep better that night after getting an acupuncture treatment or an AccuWellness treatment. They wake up then because they're well rested with less anxiety. So please feel free to take advantage of that if you've not already. A lower level of that the gal, even at our counseling center front desk, can offer is little acupressure beads that we just put on one spot on your ear that also can be really helpful for the moment. So here is our general counseling center information, as well as some of our tutoring resource information. Again, you can access any of the CSU Pueblo Starfish Pods. I'm sure Ryan has lots of great resources. So, okay, wait, how do I exit out of here? Oh dear, now I've really done it. Is everyone still here? I want to try to bring back everyone's faces. Let me see here. Well, maybe not. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add or put into the chat or speak up about as I try to remember how to get my screen back? Oh, here I am. Oh, there's a lot of you here. Geez. Glad I couldn't see. I didn't realize everyone was joining.
I just wanted to chime in that I've done the AccuWellness and that has helped tremendously. Just like if I'm stressed at work, and most of the time they can get you in like within a week, which is really nice. So highly recommend it.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your experience. That is generally what we hear consistently across the board. We have a beautiful cozy room over here too in the counseling center with a comfy recliner. You kick your legs back, it's dark, it's private. Some people report kind of falling asleep or resting. It's not talk therapy at all. So yeah, and free and available to all of you. So thank you for endorsing that, Ryan.
Yes, yeah, I love it. Another thing is that we do have tutoring centers in all of the different colleges. So sometimes anxiety can also stem from like how prepared you feel, and we do have tutors available that can kind of help you prepare beforehand as well. Does anyone have any questions? Cool. Well, if there's no questions, I appreciate you guys all coming. Elizabeth, I always appreciate you putting these on. And if you guys enjoyed this one, we do actually have one coming up in April. I forget the date. But
Yeah, me too. It might be, I forget it too. It's not
I don't
November.
know. I'll send it out sometime in April, but that one is on meditation with some chair yoga. So those could also be some helpful topics for students who enjoyed this one. But thank you.
Thank you all. Good luck with the rest of the semester.